Bleach has given us some incredible antagonists, but what happens when we put two of the most psychologically terrifying opponents against each other? In this week's Versus battle, we'll be pitting the nihilistic Ulquiorra Shifa against the terrifying Sternritter Nodt. Both characters represent different era of Bleach's antagonists. They wield fear as a weapon, and they both push the Shinigami to their absolute limits. In this video, we'll be determining why Ulquiorra versus Nodt isn't even close. So let's establish some ground rules. For the purposes of this fight, it'll take place on a neutral ground where there are no environmental advantages for each of them. We're using Ulquiorra in his Segunda Etapa form, which is his ultimate transformation that only he has achieved amongst the Espada. As for the Sternritter Nodt, he'll have his complete Quincy arsenal, including his Volstandic form called Tatarforas. This'll be a fight to the death. There's no restrictions in their abilities, and to win it's either complete incapacitation or death of the opponent. Neither of them will have prep time, so there is no unfair advantage here. Now let's go over a basic profile of each of the characters, beginning with Ulquiorra. Ulquiorra held the position of the 4th ranking Espada within Aizen's army. In terms of spiritual pressure, he was deemed to be the 4th most powerful Arrancar in existence. His role extended beyond simple combat power, as he served as Aizen's chief observer and gatherer of intelligence on the Soul Society's movements. What made Ulquiorra particularly dangerous wasn't just his strength, but his nihilism and belief that anything that he couldn't see with his own eyes simply didn't exist. This philosophy made him ruthlessly efficient and completely emotionless in his fights. Ulquiorra's most significant feat had come during his confrontation with Ichigo at Las Noches. In their first encounter, Ulquiorra completely dismantled Ichigo without even releasing his Zanpakuto, showcasing the massive gap between them. When he finally unveiled his Resurrection Murcielago, he demonstrated combat speed that allowed him to keep pace with a holified Ichigo. He also had regeneration capabilities that healed massive chest wounds, and destructive power through his signature technique Cero Oscuras. This Black Cero proved powerful enough to obliterate a significant portion of Las Noches' dome structure with just a single blast. However, Ulquiorra's true trump card was his Segunda Etapa, a second release form that he claimed no other Espada had achieved and Aizen hadn't even witnessed. In this form, his appearance became far more demonic, sporting massive black wings, elongated horns, and a tail capable of being weaponized. His speed increased to the point where even holified Ichigo struggled to track his movements. His Lanza del Relámpago technique created javelins of concentrated spiritual energy that was so unstable and powerful that even he couldn't fully control them, resulting in explosions that had carved enormous craters into the landscape of Las Noches. We now turn our attention towards Sternritter of Fear Nodt. He had served as one of Yhwach's elite Sternritter, designated with the Schrift letter F for the Fear. This granted him dominion over fear itself. Before becoming a Quincy, Nodt apparently suffered from a debilitating fear of death. So when you witness his holy form, it is quite ironic as he becomes the living embodiment of terror itself. His role during the Quincy invasion was critical, as he successfully defeated Byakuya Kuchiki, one of the Gotei 13's most respected captains, leaving the captain in critical wounded condition and stripping him of his Bankai Zenbonzakura Kageyoshi. The feat of defeating Byakuya cannot be understated. Byakuya possessed centuries of combat experience, mastery over Kido, and he was one of the fastest Shinigami in the Soul Society thanks to being trained by Yoruichi. And not to forget, he has one of the most beautiful but deadly Bankai in the Soul Society. Nodt managed to overcome all of this. This was through the application of his fear-inducing Schrift ability. During the second invasion, he pushed Rukia Kuchiki to her absolute limits, forcing her to achieve her own Bankai just to counter his powers. His abilities worked on a conceptual level, directly attacking the psyche of his opponent rather than their physical body. Nodt's Quincy abilities followed the standard Sternritter toolkit, with spirit weapon manifestation and Blutveen for defenses, but his Schrift made him truly lethal. His thorns could induce paralyzing fear into anyone that they touched, and this effect intensified with each subsequent strike. In his Volstandic standing form Tatarforas, he transformed into an angelic figure surrounded by countless eyes, and his fear became so potent that simply looking at those eyes could instill complete terror to an opponent. This ability bypassed traditional defenses entirely, making it one of the most terrifying powers in all of Bleach. Now let's examine each of their abilities. Both of them can manipulate spiritual energy, but their approaches are massively different. Ulquiorra's Reiatsu operates as pure concentrated spiritual pressure that can be weaponized into devastating attacks. His Cero Oscuras is one of the most powerful energy projection attacks amongst the Espada, and his ability to rapid fire these while maintaining other combat actions demonstrates exceptional energy control. Ulquiorra also is able to regenerate himself, though he can't regenerate vital organs, but this does allow him to heal from wounds that would incapacitate most fighters. Being a Quincy, Asnod relies on reishi manipulation, gathering spiritual particles from the environment to fuel his attacks. His spirit weapon takes the form of thorns that serve as delivery mechanisms for his fear-inducing Schrift. The conceptual nature of his ability makes it particularly dangerous because it doesn't require massive destructive output to be effective. Where Ulquiorra relies on overwhelming power and speed, Asnod operates through psychological warfare that breaks down opponents from the inside. In terms of the versatility of each of their abilities, Ulquiorra's arsenal focuses on direct combat applications with clearly defined offensive and defensive capabilities. He can fly, fire multiple types of Cero, use his tail as a weapon, throw explosive lances, and regenerate damage. His approach is straightforward devastation. Asnod conversely possesses a more specialized toolkit. His thorns need to make direct contact to inflict fear, but once they do, the battle shifts entirely into his favor as the victim's own mind becomes their worst enemy. His Volstandig amplifies this to the point where proximity alone becomes dangerous. Looking at their physical combat abilities in terms of raw destructive capability, Ulquiorra demonstrates superior output. His Lanza del Relámpago creates explosions that dwarf most attacks that we see in Bleach, and his Cero Oscuras can level massive structures. The physical force behind his strikes while in Segunda Etapa allowed him to completely overpower Ichigo's hollow form initially. His tail strikes carried enough force to pierce through enhanced Arrancar iron skin level defenses. Asnod doesn't showcase the same level of pure destructive power. His combat approach never relied on overpowering opponents through sheer force. When he fought Byakuya, he didn't match him blow for blow. Instead, he used his fear abilities to paralyze and incapacitate him. Against Rukia, even with his Volstandig active, his attacks focused on psychological damage rather than physical devastation. This doesn't make him weak, but it does indicate that in a contest of pure strength, Ulquiorra holds the advantage. In terms of speed, Ulquiorra's combat speed in Segunda Etapa allowed him to blitz a holified Ichigo, appearing behind him before Ichigo could react. His Sonido mastery enabled instant repositioning across vast distances. He could fire Lanza del Relámpago and immediately relocate before the explosion even completed. However, Asnod kept pace with Byakuya Kuchiki, whose Shumpo mastery represents one of the Soul Society's highest levels of speed. During his battle with Rukia, Asnod demonstrated impressive reaction speed and movement capabilities. The difference likely comes down to travel speed versus combat speed, with Ulquiorra showing more impressive feats of both. Regarding technique and combat skill, Ulquiorra fights with clinical precision. Every moment serves a purpose with no wasted energy, as his centuries of existence as a Hollow have given him extensive combat experience. He analyzes opponents constantly, as evidenced by his habit of reporting back to Aizen with detailed observations. Asnod, while clearly skilled, relies heavily on his Schrift ability. His combat technique against Byakuya involved overwhelming him with thorns rather than outsmarting him through superior swordsmanship or hand-to-hand combat. This suggests that while competent, Asnod's technical fighting ability falls below Ulquiorra's refined approach. Ulquiorra demonstrates his intelligence in battle as he adapts methodically, as seen when he recognized the threat of Ichigo's hollow transformation and immediately increased his own power to counter it. However, Ulquiorra doesn't improvise creatively. Everything that he does follows logical progression. Asnod, on the other hand, demonstrates a different type of battlefield intelligence. He understands psychological warfare intimately, and he knows exactly how to exploit his abilities to maximum effect. When he fought Byakuya, Rukia, he didn't simply spam attacks, he strategically built up the fear effect until Byakuya couldn't function. He timed his Volständig activation against Rukia at the moment when it would be the most devastating. This showed tactical awareness and understanding of dramatic timing in combat. When Rukia developed a counter to Nodt, he struggled to adapt, suggesting that his tactical flexibility has limits. Now let's examine their durability and stamina. Ulquiorra's durability in Segunda Etapa operated at insane levels. He was able to tank attacks from Ichigo's holified form, and his regeneration provided additional survivability as he is able to heal all of his body aside from vital organs. His spiritual pressure was so dense that it created tangible weight in the atmosphere. The concentration of his Reiatsu functioned as passive defense against weaker attacks. Nodt, on the other hand, survived attacks from Byakuya before ultimately overwhelming him, demonstrating respectable durability. His Blutvein provided Quincy-level defensive capabilities, however when Rukia's Haka no Tagame froze him to absolute zero, he shattered completely. This indicates that while durable by normal standards, he possessed clear vulnerabilities to overwhelming force or specific counter abilities. His durability came primarily from defensive techniques rather than inherent physical resilience. When looking at their stamina, we see Ulquiorra was able to maintain Segunda Etapa through extended combat without visible fatigue. He fired multiple Lanza del Relámpago, engaged in high-speed melee combat, and sustained damage without showing diminished performance. His spiritual energy reserves appeared virtually limitless during his fight with Ichigo. Nodt's stamina proved sufficient for extended battles, maintaining his Volständig form through his fight with Rukia. However, Quincy abilities typically draw from environmental reishi, meaning Nodt's endurance depended somewhat on available spiritual particles. Ulquiorra's energy came from his own internal reserves, thus making it a bit more reliable, especially if Nodt finds himself in an environment that isn't surrounded by reishi. Now let's look at each of their ultimate abilities. Ulquiorra's ultimate attack is Lanza del Relámpago. This represents one of Bleach's most destructive attacks. These javelin-shaped energy constructs were so unstable that Ulquiorra himself admitted that he couldn't fully control the trajectory of them. The resulting explosions carved enormous craters into Los Noches' reinforced structure. He could generate multiple lances, though doing so required concentration. If even one connected, the explosion alone could potentially obliterate Nodt before his fear abilities took full effect. The technique's weakness lay in its instability and the setup time required to form each lance. Nodt's ultimate ability was his Volständig enhanced fear aura. In Tatarforas form, his fear became so potent that simply being looked upon by his manifested eyes induced paralysis. This bypassed all conventional defenses since it attacked the psyche directly. The technique's strength lay in its unavoidable nature once activated. Its weakness manifested when opponents found ways to avoid seeing the eyes, or in Rukia's cases, eliminated sensation entirely through absolute zero temperatures. Against someone without emotions or fear response, the ability's effectiveness does become questionable. The interaction between these ultimate attacks creates the matchup's central tension. If Ulquiorra's nihilistic philosophy genuinely renders him immune to fear manipulation, Nodt's entire arsenal becomes ineffective. However, if the Schrift F works on a more fundamental level that bypasses conscious emotion, even Ulquiorra may succumb to the fear. The answer likely determines the entire outcome of the fight. When it comes to a wildcard in this matchup, it centers around Ulquiorra's unique psychology. Throughout his entire existence, he demonstrated zero emotional response to anything. He didn't fear death, didn't feel pain's psychological impact, didn't experience doubt or hesitation. When he died, his final words questioned whether he discovered the heart which he never understood. This absolute emotional void could make him completely immune to Nodt's fear manipulation. There are people out there who claim that Ulquiorra exhibited fear during his battle against Ichigo, or that he was surprised. Well, there's a massive difference between reacting surprise to feeling genuine fear. Every opponent Asnod has faced possessed normal emotional ranges. They could feel fear because they had something to lose or things that they valued. Ulquiorra believed nothing he couldn't see existed, including abstract concepts like fear itself. This fundamental difference in worldview might create a natural immunity which Asnod would have never encountered before. The counter-argument suggests that Schrift abilities operate on conceptual levels beyond normal psychology. Yubak's power distribution system granted abilities that functioned through spiritual mechanics rather than purely psychological ones. Fear might manifest as a spiritual effect that doesn't require conscious emotional response. However, this remains to be speculative since we've never seen Asnod face an opponent with Ulquiorra's specific mindset. So this is how I think that this fight plays out in most scenarios. Asnod opens by launching Thorns, attempting to establish his fear-inducing effect. Ulquiorra, operating with Segunda Etapa active, evades with overwhelming speed while analyzing the attack pattern. When Thorns do make contact, Ulquiorra shows no reaction because fear as a concept doesn't register in his consciousness. Asnod, recognizing his primary ability isn't working, then activates Tatarforas immediately. The Volstandig's eyes attempt to induce terror through direct observation, but Ulquiorra continues attacking without hesitation. His Cero Oscuras barrage forces Asnod into defensive maneuvers. The Sternritter's Blutveen helps mitigate damage, but Ulquiorra's overwhelming power gradually breaks through. Asnod tries switching tactics, using his Thorns more aggressively, but Ulquiorra's speed makes consistent contact difficult. The decisive moment comes when Ulquiorra generates Lanza del Relámpago. Asnod, lacking the speed to evade and the durability to survive, gets caught in the explosion. Even if the initial blast doesn't kill Asnod, the sustained assault from an emotionless opponent who won't hesitate or falter eventually overwhelms him. Asnod's entire combat strategy relies on psychological exploitation. Against a nihilistic opponent with no psychology to exploit, he has no answer for Ulquiorra's raw power and speed. The only scenario that I think Asnod wins in would require his fear manipulation working on fundamental spiritual levels that bypass conscious emotion entirely. If the Schrift F can inflict terror regardless of the target's mental state, he could potentially paralyze Ulquiorra long enough to deliver a fatal strike. However, given Ulquiorra's demonstrated immunity to all emotional manipulation through his existence, this seems to be very unlikely. This matchup does fundamentally favor Ulquiorra because his greatest weakness throughout his fight with Ichigo was his inability to understand the heart and emotions. Against an opponent whose entire arsenal depends on emotions, that weakness becomes his greatest strength. I did run a community poll on the channel where I asked all of you who would win in a 1 vs 1 fight. There were thousands of votes, but 78% thought that Ulquiorra would win, while only 22% thought that Asnod would win. It seems like the community recognizes the analysis that when fear itself faces someone who cannot experience fear, then fear loses. Now we have reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. What are your thoughts on Ulquiorra versus Asnod? Do you agree with the analysis in this video, or do you think that there is something that I've forgotten to mention which could turn the tide of the battle? I love reading all of your comments, so continue the discussion down below. And lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next one.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.